Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day of this, the Clown Decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And unfortunately, we apparently have the starting pistol for accelerating the clownishness. Amazingly of this decade, I know, given how clownish it has been, but we really are going to be accelerating into the much worse territory. So for I'm sure many of you who at least somewhat keep an eye on the news, you will know that yesterday Rishi Sunak called for an election on July the 4th, and he had to give literally one of the worst announcements for this election that I've ever seen.
In the last 5 years, our country has fought through the most challenging times since the Second World War. As I stand here as your Prime Minister, I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years ago. I stood behind one of the podiums, upstairs in the building behind me. I told you that we faced a generation-defining moment and that we as a society would not be judged by some government action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another.
Oh God, what? Why? Why would that be the way you introduce the fact that you are going to be having another election? And people knew this pretty much all day, especially in the afternoon, because of all the leaks that were coming out from the cabinet meeting that he was calling at 4 p.m. But also you'll notice that his podium doesn't have the crest of Her Majesty's government on it, and that pretty much always indicates that an election announcement is about to be blared out. But simply put, for a Tory leader or Prime Minister to get up on a podium and say, we will give you small acts of kindness, it's clear that you are still embarrassed and trying to get away from Thatcher's legacy, because obviously that's when they were dubbed the Nasty Party. And honestly, when people think of Tories and small acts of kindness, I don't know what the hell they're trying to think. You are still seen as the Nasty Party by pretty much every elite. No amount of convincing is going to do that. So, as Dominic Cummings constantly says, why don't you try and talk to voters instead of the media class, the political commentator class, literally anyone else? Matt Goodwin also has good analysis on this. Stop talking to these new elite. They are not the vote-winning cohorts that you should be after. Most people just want a country that works. They don't particularly care if you act more or less charitable.
And when I introduced the furlough scheme, I did so not because I saw a country simply in need of desperate help, albeit we were, but because I saw a country whose future hung in the balance. I could be bold and trust in the tens of millions of you at home that you would rise to the moment. Or I could accept the inevitable, millions of job losses, and pick up the pieces.
I've got to say, the thing I'm finding about this announcement so funny is, what was your biggest act as Prime Minister? Well, it wasn't an act of Prime Minister, it was an act as Chancellor, actually. And it was basically giving out a load of money to everyone so that they don't have to work, because we have decided to panic and shut down the entire country. And whether it was the right thing to do or not, it's quite immaterial. I'm not here to debate that. What I am here to point out, though, is that basically nobody cares about the furlough scheme. Personally, I think it was one of the most disastrous decisions known to man. But the problem is that you have absolutely no choice if you're locking down the country and saying people can't work. Well, if they can't work, they can't earn money. And so obviously you're going to have to do something to help their income. But in hindsight, the Dominic Cummings, right, let's just lock down for 2 weeks and then get track and trace properly working was probably the way to go. But our government is so inefficient and useless that was just never going to happen. So they just carried on locking down the country for a year and having to constantly extend the furlough scheme. And then what you get in the future, 11% inflation, because you had to print a load of money for this. And now we need to up productivity to actually make up for that, and that's basically not happening. None of this is going to be mentioned, by the way. Why would he mention it's a disaster? But even from the left-wing perspective, they wanted furlough, and they probably want it permanently, but they'd certainly want it harder. When I say we have absolutely no right-wing alternative in the UK, this is absolutely true. Reform probably won't even bring this up, because Richard Tice is the most useless person to put in a political position I have ever seen. He's a good businessman, though. Anyway, he spent a full minute talking about COVID. I don't know why he would do that. People don't associate Rishi Sunak with good COVID work. They associate pretty much the entire Tory party with, oh, they told us we can't leave our home and yet they all partied. But the problem is that he has absolutely nothing to show for his time as Prime Minister, apart from bringing inflation down. But that's entirely within the remit of the Bank of England and nothing to do with Parliament. And so he's basically just trying to lie to the entire voter base, and all the media have to do is saying that he's playing you for fools. And then again, that's not going to be a particularly helpful outlook for most voters.
Then, just as we were recovering from COVID, war returned to Europe, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine sending your energy bills spiralling. I came to office, above all, to restore economic stability.
Yeah, this cost of living crisis, yeah, I want to carry on the orthodoxy that caused it in the first place. That is exactly what I was put in for, that's exactly what I did. Man, people really want more of that. And I'm not joking, people probably do. Starmer isn't going to massively upend how the economy works. He is going to completely follow the orthodoxy that is constantly causing us to stagnate as a country. That's all that's going to happen.
And because of our collective sacrifice and your hard work, we have reached 2 major milestones in delivering that stability. Our economy is now growing faster than anyone predicted, outpacing Germany, France and the United States.
I mean, this is technically true for Q1 2024, but, I mean, you look at previous stats, yeah, we were actually shrinking. We were in recession for 2 quarters, as was the Eurozone, to be fair. But you look at the USA, Q3 2023, 1.2% GDP growth. And bear in mind, their GDP is massive, so that is quite the growth. And those are numbers we can only dream of. A bad quarter for the US is 0.4% GDP growth. A good quarter for the UK is 0.6%. Again, we have such low expectations of how this country should work that Rishi Sunak thinks that a good thing to mention is that our growth being slightly better than a bad USA quarter is something that we should vote the Tories on. And I may as well make it clear now, I have 2 choices as far as I'm concerned when it comes to the ballot box. I'm either spoiling or voting Tory. And I'm not going to lie, this speech isn't exactly inspiring hope.
And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal.
Again, that has absolutely nothing to do with Rishi Sunak and everything to do with the Bank of England. It's the Bank of England that control the money supply. They are the only people that can do anything about inflation.
This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down.
So you may have noticed at this point that there is loud music being played over Rishi Sunak's speech. That is, Things Can Only Get Better by Tharium. For those of you who don't know, that was effectively the election anthem for Tony Blair when he first got in 1997. It was music being blasted by Stop Brexit man Steve Bray. Here's a video of him getting arrested and being banned from Westminster for basically just being a general nuisance.
Are you proud of yourselves, boys and girls?
Fascists! This is not law! This is not law! This is not law!
A law was broken specifically to do this to this man. There is a long established constitutional rule against particular law. Long established. This country has fallen to fascism.
There's something just very funny about 2 older white British guys shouting at, frankly, a relatively multicultural police squad there and calling them fascists while they are trying to disrupt the speech of yet another ethnic minority prime minister. Again, the history books are either going to go one way or the other. They're either going to double down on all this nonsense, I think that's quite unlikely, or this is going to be seen as some sort of mass hysteria. Because it's quite easy to point to someone like McCarthy and say he was a fascist because he was trying to stop all open and fair discussion from communists. Again, that is not a reading of history I agree with, but it's quite hard to say that they're doing that when you're basically just trying to get rid of a nuisance who is adding absolutely nothing to the conversation other than shouting down a megaphone and trying to drown out a national speech from a PM. Again, 2 white guys drowning out an ethnic minority PM while ethnic minority officers are the ones stopping him from doing it again. Anyway, that was just a funny aside. Another absolute disaster of this announcement was just letting Rishi Sunak go out and announce this in the pouring rain. The rain doesn't really get picked up on cameras, but you can clearly see Rishi Sunak is slowly getting soaked in his suit. And it just makes him look like a wet dog. And it's not the type of look you want to see when an election is announced, because everyone is going to harken back to this and say he just does not look prepared, looks almost embarrassed during this speech, and looks far from prime ministerial. Honestly, somewhere from 50 to 80% of politics is literally all down to optics. This is awful optics. How are the Tories supposed to market this Prime Minister? I don't know. But obviously this was just the initial announcement. There's going to be more we're going to go through, so let's see if it improves. Anyway, Rishi Sunak then starts talking about how his economic plans, which as I go through, he basically had no control over, are working, and goes on to say this.
The question now is how and who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country. Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future.
Obviously the implication here is Tories will be the ones to keep it stable, and Labour will be the ones to do the opposite. When again, in reality, if you just read Dominic Cummings's, or check out the Wellington Project's stream on Dominic Cummings's plans for the future, you will know that effectively both are a pretty bad option. But I'm not going to be silly and say they're both terrible and not worth voting for. Tories probably are the least worst option, at least from the policies that both parties have been talking about so far. But as I say, still doesn't particularly inspire hope. Anyway, he then announces that the King has given permission to dissolve Parliament next Friday to allow for the campaigning season to start for an election on July the 4th, which is basically just asking Labour to call for an independence day from the Tories. And yes, this is implying that basically this entire video is saying that this entire announcement is a slow-motion suicide. Because a day later, all the news from inside the cabinet meeting that led to this decision were released to the public. And apparently, I actually find this unbelievable, and you'll find out why soon, but unbelievably, Rishi Sunak said, I don't think anyone will mind if they spring a surprise election on July the 4th, because the economic outlook was improving, and it was time to be bold. We've got to own the choice and frame the choice, he said. However, there were sensible people in the cabinet, as Esther McVey, the Cabinet Office Minister, said that she disagreed and argued that Tories need more time to improve economic outlook to feed through to voters. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, said he would not have gone early, but added he was 100% behind the Prime Minister. And I can only presume he is that confident, either because he is in a safe seat and wants his place on the shadow cabinet, or he just couldn't be bothered with an argument before he lost his seat. The Prime Minister became concerned that the longer he waited, the more he would be susceptible to accusations that he was clinging on, since apparently it was a month ago he made the decision that we were going to go into an election, and he even made the decision before the local election results, probably because he knew that it was going to be a complete disaster, which it was, by the way. And as that disaster continues, he doesn't want to be accused of clinging on, when, if it were me, I would cling on and give people actual evidence and proof that the economic situation was improving. But at this point, as we will see shortly enough, probably in an hour or so, the economic situation is pretty much entirely theory. The narrative that the Tories once deployed successfully against Gordon Brown, that he was squatting at number 10, would be deployed against Sunak by going early. The thinking was Sunak could seize the agenda. The decision was not without doubt. Isaac Levido, the Australian election strategist overseeing the campaign, advised that Sunak should wait until autumn to stand the best chance of winning, but others, including key aides such as his Chief of Staff, Liam Booth-Smith, and James Forsyth, his political secretary, backed the Prime Minister's judgment. Probably because James Forsyth wants to go back to The Spectator and write about what a disaster Labour will be. So, with improved economics in theory on the mind, the other issue that weighed on his mind was Rwanda. A source said that while they were hoping for the first flight would take off before polling day, there was a risk that the policy might not show an immediate effect on small boat crossings, as my video yesterday showed. It clearly hasn't. If you got to the autumn and the number of illegal crossings had not gone down, that would be a problem, they said. Sunak's decision took the majority of his own ministers by surprise, even when the evidence was increasingly obvious. In the wake of Wednesday morning's inflation figures, the Prime Minister and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, refused to rule out an early election, and so obviously, as we saw, all agendas had to be cleared from the calendar. People either had to delay flights or come back from foreign countries. I mean, this is what David Cameron was rolling up to as he was told, right, you have to go back now. And obviously the cabinet was told we're having an election. There was a bit of a surprise. And then the whole nation went, oh, right, okay, this is a bit of a weird move. And while the cabinet were either putting forward slight critiques or just going along with it for the fun of it, it appears that backbenchers were caught completely off guard and beyond annoyed at it. In fact, I think beyond annoyed is even understating it. So irate that they are pretty much in open secret talks of rebellion. According to the political editor of GB News, Christopher Hope, dozens of Conservative MPs who are standing down at the election will now have to say their goodbyes hurriedly on Friday and be out of Parliament by the dissolution on Thursday next week. Some are furious, which, yeah, that is completely understandable. This has been completely sprung on the Tories out of nowhere if they're not in the cabinet. And as many people were thinking, this is probably going to be an election that is going to be in the autumn or probably spring of next year at the latest, so they had a bit more time to prepare. But now, no. You have to hurry. You've got a week, if that. 3 days to get out of Parliament, and then we're dissolving next Thursday. You're out of a job. Goodbye. It's no wonder they're furious. And this isn't the only bad news. Because in Rishi Sunak's infinite wisdom, he had no plans to meet with his backbench MPs at a meeting of the 1922 committee, the Committee of Backbenchers in Parliament, before Parliament is dissolved. Figures close to the PM tell me. Several backbenchers are absolutely furious about the timing of the election, which they expected in autumn. One Tory MP says he knows one of the letters of no confidence is being submitted to the 1922 chairman, Sir Graham Brady, tonight. And Sir Graham Brady, God bless him, he's had to go through, 5 of these no confidence votes in his time on the 1922 committee in the past 5 years or so. The man has had an unbelievable job, and I do not blame him for wanting to get out of politics in this election, where he's honestly probably going to lose his seat anyway. He says this is a disaster. He is condemning the Tory party to election oblivion, with a second Tory MP telling him this is absolute madness and the launch was a farce. And from what I can tell, yes, it was a complete farce. And if that wasn't bad enough that not only are the Tory MPs severely annoyed at Sunak for this surprise election that he didn't even deign to tell his Tory MPs about, which, to be fair, I suppose he was expecting them to leak that fact. There is now apparently plans for the Tory MPs to work on a plot to call off the general election by replacing Rishi Sunak before Parliament is dissolved next Thursday. Several letters of no confidence are already going to the 1922 committee. Whether they actually make it through or not, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if most backbench Tory MPs are just thinking, I'll take all the money I can before I obviously lose my seat or step down. I really can't be bothered with another political farce, which I don't blame them for. It's been embarrassing enough for the Tories for the past year or two. Anyway, the proper start of Rishi Sunak's election campaign was sent out on Twitter, so let's take a look at the clip.
I've just come back in from calling the general election, and I wanted to explain to you why.
I do wonder if he initially meant to wear the suit for this video straight after calling the general election, because obviously he has had to take off his jacket because it was absolutely soaking. To be honest, I'm surprised that his shirt isn't wetter than it looked outside, though to be fair, I also wouldn't be shocked if he had backups ready in case of just an emergency. Anyway, go on, Mr. Sunak, please tell me what your plans are. Why should I vote for you?
Our economy is now growing faster than France, Germany and the United States. And this morning we received the welcome news that inflation has returned to normal.
It's a hell of a strategy, and I do mean this, it is a hell of a strategy to see these economic announcements, and they are good announcements, don't get me wrong, but then, expect in the next 6 weeks people are just going to forget about everything else they've been told to worry about by the media for the past 2 years. Oh, how did they let inflation get to 11%? Because they've got no control over it. Oh, Liz Truss made my house prices skyrocket. Interest rates went up all over the planet. But this is part of the problem. These economics were worldwide phenomenons, because pretty much everything is at the behest of the American economy anyway. However, Tories can't admit that, because then they have to admit that they don't really have control over the economy, as Liz Truss was trying to imply, and it's literally the only positive news that they can give. The economy's improving. It's down to nothing that Rishi Sunak has done, but it's all they've got. And the thing is, because absolutely nobody in the UK really knows anything about economics, they can get away with it to some extent, because the media doesn't really know how to report on it. There's some people that know and will report that Rishi Sunak has no power over inflation, but they maybe will put it in a throwaway line somewhere in an article about Rishi Sunak's speeches and campaign, but people won't particularly pick it up because people don't read articles, they read headlines. And there's never been a headline that says Rishi Sunak has no control over inflation, you idiots. So it's no wonder that all he's really working off is, oh my god, I hope the predictions that the economy is going to improve and people will feel it will actually hit. Because when there's an economic change like this and things look like they're improving, you've got to wait at least 6 months before generally the population feels the benefit. But he's not doing that. He's completely rushed into it on the same day as the good news, and people aren't buying it.
Now, this is a sign that our plan and our priorities are working. Now, I know it hasn't always been easy, and I know you're only just starting to feel the benefits.
Rishi, it's been a day. No one's felt the benefit yet. And by the way, from what I can see, the only real benefit from a 2% inflation is that prices don't rise as much as they used to, and you're only going to see that benefit when you get your pay rise. But people's pay rise was back in April, generally anyway. When it comes to feeling the economic benefit, as I say, it's going to take at least 6 months, and even then for most people it's probably not going to hit them until a year. Banking so much on good theory is a disaster, because how are you supposed to market this to people? Yeah, it's been 14 years of us, we're getting you out of a disaster that we caused. That's what the narrative's going to be from literally everybody else.
But this hard-won economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning, and that's why I've called the election, so that we can decide whether we want to build on the progress that we've made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty.
To be absolutely fair to Rishi Sunak here, I again did a recent video about Labour's actual economic plan, and it is more or less true. Their only plan is really do what the Tories have been doing for years, subsidise green industries and put even more money into training, and then hope that the private sector are encouraged to actually put more money into it. But as I go through in the video, the private sector are completely put off from investing anything into the energy sector or many other sectors in the UK, because effectively if they start making a profit, it's taxed to oblivion, to the point where some companies are even taxed over 100% of their profits, and they are forced into a loss. Now, I actually wouldn't be surprised if that is on Rishi Sunak's radar and he actually does something about it if he's elected again. But Labour aren't even talking about it whatsoever, because effectively what they're coasting on is the complete annihilation of the Tory party and their slow-motion suicide. And the worst part is it might work, but as I say, they're not a better option by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they are categorically worse still. But that message is not going to be enough to win the election, I'm afraid. You've had 14 years of Tory government. Of course, people are going to get the vibe that Tories aren't working, then let's try something else. And you're going to have a hell of a campaign to market yourself beyond the 14 years of managed decline. And I don't think Rishi Sunak's going to be very good at it.
Now, I believe that our plan and the bold actions that we're prepared to take will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
Basically what Rishi Sunak's plan is, right, in theory things are going to get better. You just have to believe in this party that's been in power for 14 years and helped manufacture some of these disasters. Anyway, a couple of hours after that video was posted to Twitter, Rishi Sunak was going to make an announcement to actual party members and Tory MPs. One thing I did find funny though was that just before the rally was to start, a Sky News reporter was actually kicked out of the rally.
Campaign event.
At a Conservative Party launch, this is where the Prime Minister is going to speak in the next few minutes, and I'm being forcibly removed. We just simply wanted to have access tonight at Sky News, but unfortunately we're told that because there are pool arrangements in place, we're not allowed to be here. This is, by the way, what we're trying to film is the campaign event where the Prime Minister is due to speak.
So for those of you who don't know, a pool arrangement is effectively there are certain journalists and organisations that have been invited to this rally, and they are the only ones that can capture the footage, but they must share that footage with other organisations such as Sky News. And these things are perfectly reasonable. That's so that every news organisation can use footage of said rally or political event or whatever, while not having to sacrifice room for Tory members or Tory MPs for the behest of big Sky News cameras and reporters. But it was just funny how they were falling victim to this, acting like victims, when I have no doubt that Sky News will definitely have been in pool arrangements before at the expense of other organisations. Oh, and Sky News also wanted to join the cartel of news organisations that didn't ever want to have pool arrangements with GB News. So as far as I care, forget him. I don't care. Anyway, let's see what the rally was like.
You are up for this general election!
That is genuinely more energy than I was expecting from this rally, so At least he's got cabinet ministers on his side, I suppose.
The last few years have been tough. I know that, you know that. We've been dealing with COVID, which so badly upended our way of life. And then the huge spike in our energy bills caused by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But together, as we learnt this morning, we have got inflation down from 11% to 2%. We have delivered on my first priority, to drive inflation back to normal.
Yeah, so Rishi Sunak had a 5-point plan. To be fair, his 5-point plan actually had halving inflation, which halving inflation from 11%, easiest thing in the world. Just the Bank of England just needs to stop printing money. Second one was economic growth, which technically, again, 0.6% this quarter, whatever. Although let's just not mention the recession. Debt falling to reduce the national debt, because it is pretty close to 100% of the national GDP, which in historical standards, when it goes above 100%, typically we're in a state of war. Next up, waiting lists, cut the NHS waiting lists. Again, we'll get into that. He ain't going to mention that. And finally, small boats. That's probably going to be the most embarrassing one. But anyway, let's get back to the rally for now.
Now, we've shown the country that it is only this Conservative Party that can deliver the economic stability, the foundation of our national success. The economy is growing again, faster than Germany, France, and the United States. Wages have been rising faster than prices for 10 months now. The economy has turned a corner. Friends, our plan is working.
So whether that is actually true or not doesn't particularly matter. What matters is how people feel. Again, a lot of politics is literally just vibes. This is why vibes-based politics has just come out in droves in the past few decades. People will only remember 14 years. I've not felt great with the Tory party being in charge. In fact, I feel like despite quality of life obviously going up over that time, it feels like recently it's going down again. I don't particularly like that. I'm happy with anyone else to give it a go. Oh, Labour are the other side, let's try them. Whereas with most people, it's actually more of a, you're right, Labour don't have a plan, but I don't trust yours, so I think I'm just going to disengage. I mean, that's why I'm going to be spoiling my ballot anyway.
Now, this election takes place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it's been since at any point since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine, and he'll not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. China is seeking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders.
Again, all of these things, to me anyway, because I'm so engaged in it, fall on deaf ears. Oh, we need energy security. I mean, when we're building nuclear power plants, there is constant news that foreign investors are constantly pulling out because, again, of our ridiculous tax system on energy companies that also makes them simply not want to invest in renewable energy either. But again, you've been in power 14 years. You've seen these problems happen. Why does nothing ever seem to get done about it? Well, if you read Dominic Cummings' blog, it's an awful lot of the time because there are numerous parts of the system that completely get in the way, whether that be civil servants saying certain points of legislation will get in the way so they don't even bother going further than that. When those pieces of legislation are investigated, it turns out actually they won't get in the way at all and court challenges aren't put on in the way. But then you've got local councils to deal with when you want to put up new wind farms or nuclear power stations. Effectively, there are layers of bureaucracy to get all this regulation out of the way as well, and so we are just stuck in this stagnant bureaucratic mess that basically nobody is saying that they want to get rid of. Reform might do it, but I don't think they're going to be capable. I'm going on about migration and Islamism when we are frankly struggling to even arrest people like this.
Our day will come, but we must normalize massacres as the status quo.
And if these people are being arrested, you need to make sure the media are covering it. Front pages everywhere. Islamist deported. Islamist on the way to Rwanda. Islamist jailed for life or whatever. Any of this stuff would be helpful. But no, all we see is more and more Palestine protests put on university campuses, cheering for the Houthis and other Islamist terrorists in the Middle East. It's ridiculous. There is absolutely no control that people can see. If there is control, it needs to be better publicised. Again, 90% of politics is marketing, especially when it comes to universal suffrage. People vote based on vibes. That is just clearly how things work.
Just look at our plan to cut migration and stop the boats with our Rwanda scheme.
He goes on to talk about how the rest of Europe, the penny's dropping, that their scheme is probably going to work, but it's not worked yet. You got two sides to this debate, and neither actually thinks that the Rwanda plan is really working, especially yet. You have the side that thinks it is basically Rishi Sunak cosplaying as Hitler to get rid of the Browns, despite the fact he is brown, and then you've got people on more our side that think, well, it just seems like a colossal waste of money that's not really doing much at the moment. As it ramps up, yeah, I'm sure that that will have a deterrent effect on people coming over to the UK. But again, what you're asking me is to trust you on this one and just ignore your past failures. It's quite an ask.
In every way, Labour would make our country less secure.
And that is pretty much what this entire rally and campaign is going to be from the Tory side. Trust the plan, trust the plan, trust the plan. Labour will be worse, trust us. Look, they don't even have a plan. And I suppose at the very least, there is a plan from the Tories. And I don't even necessarily think it's the worst plan imaginable. In fact, I'd say it's in the top half of plans, but that's not really saying much. I want way more than that. But again, as a lot of people point out, including Dominic Cummings, it doesn't really matter who ends up in Parliament. It does to an extent, and I'll go into that in a second, but the whole bureaucratic system of the civil service and even the Cabinet Office and things like that, it is basically just designed to set the rudder in one direction. Effectively, you put anything remotely right-wing through to the civil service, through to anyone, they'll take you to court, they'll say, no, we're not doing that, or they'll be very lazy when it comes to actually implementing it. You do something that the civil service wants, which is generally left-wing, it will be done overnight. So Labour will be able to do a lot overnight, it's just that it will be terrible things, terrible ideas, terrible policy that I guarantee will make the country worse. So in a way, once again, the Tories are asking me, and possibly even I will be asking you, please vote Tories to keep Labour out. And it really does sadden me that I'm having to say it again, but given the options I do have, I'm sorry, it's all I can give you for these options. Anyway, that's pretty much what he says for the rest of that speech. It's just, we have a plan, Labour don't, vote for us. Whether you find that convincing or not is entirely up to you. I am still on the fence of spoiling or voting for them. Anyway, I think it's about time we have a quick look at the other side. What was Starmer saying in reaction to this announcement?
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election.
Already, by the way, the optics are just far better than what Rishi Sunak's optics were. Drowned rat, in the rain, looking depressed. Keir Starmer here looking confident. Union Jack on either side. We are the party of change, exactly what that change is. Doesn't really matter, we're just different from the Tories. Already I can see people who base their entire vote on vibes are already probably saying, yeah, this looks quite a bit better. But let's see what he has to say.
A moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you.
Again, in terms of vibes, it's just so much better than Rishi Sunak at the moment. Not really selling an awful lot of what he's actually going to do, but saying, oh, the power will go from the elites to you. It's already a message that people want to hear, really. Again, the legacy of the Tory party, especially over COVID, was, screw all of you. You all have to stay inside and can only go out for an hour a day. We're going to party with all our friends. As true or not true as that is the feeling that people got. I have an auntie that literally only votes Green now because Boris Johnson was done for having some cake with some of his work colleagues. And again, pretty much everyone thought that was within the rules, but then, you get an investigation from Sue Gray? It turns out, no, it was breaking the rules. By the way, she's gone over to Labour now, by the way. Again, this is a party of the totally not elites, having the actual elites that people don't see as elites because people don't concentrate on politics, becoming part of their upper ranks. Again, Labour is basically just lying here, don't get me wrong, the Tories will be lying too. However, Labour are much more cynical with their lies, and this is one thing you've got to realise. Things will be way worse under Labour, no matter what they promise. When they say change, do you really think they are going to be changing when they have civil servants that manage to bring down Boris Johnson in their ranks? Do you really think that's going to be the case?
A chance to change for the better. Your future, your community, your country.
You get the idea, though. This may all be lies. Doesn't matter. To the average person, this is what they want to hear. So, what is the actual policy that he is going to be introducing? What are they going to be doing with the economy? Hopefully, you'd expect this to have some information on that. So, let's just skip to those bits.
Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country.
Again, no detail on exactly how they're going to do that yet, but I did want to put this part in because, again, Keir Starmer was part of Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet. He was absolutely fine endorsing Jeremy Corbyn as a Prime Minister and leader of the opposition when he won the vote from millions of students who joined the Labour Party for £3 back in the day. And say over the past 4 years they've changed from that. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is that Keir Starmer is clearly just a political expedient. I don't think he really does have a plan. I think Rishi Sunak is correct about that. I think, again, he is just going off vibes and wanting to up his status to get to that prime ministerial position, because as we'll go through in the speech, what policies does he actually have? I mean, I will skip to one now. Let's see.
Why you should change Britain with Labour. 1, because we will stop the chaos.
Oh, for goodness sake, what does that mean?
Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, crime virtually unpunished, mortgages and food prices through the roof.
Yes, and every policy that the Tories put forward that would actually help any of this, you were either dead set against, or policy that would make it way worse. I'm thinking of the furlough scheme. You wanted the same thing on roids. You said it wasn't enough. Again, the Tories' track record is pretty bad, but when it comes to their actual track record of things that were actually bad, Labour are all behind it saying, actually, we need this, but way worse. And anything that is good from Tory side, Labour were dead set against. But again, the vibes of the normal person, the vibes of the person who's not completely engaged like I am and like I'm sure a lot of my audience is, unfortunately that's not how they're going to see it. And Rishi Sunak can't exactly say that the furlough scheme was a bit of a disaster and what caused inflation. No, you need to blame it on Putin and Russia, which I suppose at the very least they can say, yes, see, this happened worldwide, this must have been them. But it didn't happen as badly worldwide because not everywhere had a furlough scheme. I mean, America had some Trump books, and yes, everyone did have some form of welfare to make up for lockdown. But inflation in places where they didn't, in places like Sweden, you don't see as bad inflation. But that is never a story they will tell.
A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos.
I've cut out about a minute or so of the speech here. It is literally all to this vibes. We will change. Tories will carry on being bad. They will take another 5 years to carry on doing what they have always been doing, which is bad, corruption and chaos, and make things worse for you. And again, all you have to do is point to Labour and say, you've got a hell of a lot of ex-civil servants in your ranks. You've got a hell of a lot of people that have helped overturn Tories' decisions in some way. You are the person that has helped with this chaos because you are filled with ranks of people who have helped cause the chaos by basically not letting the government and parliament do what it's supposed to do, which is actually run the country. Things that were good and have been stopped, done by the civil service, some of those people have gone over to Labour. Things that were bad and have gone through, like pushing on an open door, again, those civil servants have gone to Labour. Labour is basically the open door to making everything worse go through and never allowing anything that can improve the economics or politics of the country to ever be allowed to be policy ever again. Yes, I do mean that. Yes, I am convincing myself more and more through this speech that Tories are probably going to have to get a vote from me.
2, because it's time for change. Our offer is to reset both our economy and our politics, so that they once again serve the interests of working people.
This is the entire speech, by the way. The entire speech is just Tories were bad, we're going to change things. There's absolutely no detail on how anything is going to change. No policy announcements, from what I can tell. I will listen to the rest of this. If there is absolutely nothing on policy announcements or nothing other than Tories are bad, we will change things, I'm just going to skip it. If this is the speech, then politics really is doomed in the UK, because people are going to be convinced by it simply because all they're hearing is 14 years were bad, fine, I'll vote for something else even if it is worse. Because it doesn't sound worse, and that makes me feel good.
We totally reject the Tory view that economic strength is somehow gifted from those at the top.
Of the whole second point, this is the only interesting part, which obviously again is going to change. It is true that the Tories do prefer big business. However, it is important to note that big business are the ones lobbying for things that actually make it harder to be a big business, because it makes it even harder to be a small or medium enterprise, and that's why they're constantly pushed down, and it's quite hard to actually build a business in the UK. And this is why basically the only way to be profitable on a high street these days is to be a front for money laundering for drug gangs. Why do you think you keep seeing vape shops? Why do you think you keep seeing American candy stores? Why do you keep seeing Turkish barbers everywhere? Because it's pretty much an open secret at this point that those are the types of businesses that are just fronts for money laundering. And it's pretty common to see high streets that maybe have one supermarket, couple of vape shops, maybe one American candy store, though that's mainly in London and other big cities, and about 10 Turkish barbers. This is the reason, because they're the only ones that can survive, because they're not fully legitimate. But nothing will be done about that because it's probably racist. Nothing will be done to improve the high streets. I don't believe Labour will try and do anything to improve rent prices for high streets or ease the making of small or medium businesses, because they're not in the interest of doing that. When they say, oh, we reject the Tories thinking that money comes from on top, they actually do agree. They just think that the people on top should be different, and specifically in government rather than in business. However, that's pretty much how we've been working for the past 14 years anyway. Again, a third of the entire public spending budget is spent on redistribution of wealth, and that'll only get worse.
And finally, 3, because we have a long-term plan to rebuild Britain. A plan that is ready to go, fully costed and fully funded.
I think at this point I just have to accept that that sort of plan is only going to come out when the manifesto comes out. They probably had one drafted up, and in fact we went through with the Wellington Project a draft of that. However, it will be interesting to go through, and no doubt we'll be going through it with the Wellington Project, so please go and subscribe over there, link in the description. But finally, let's see if there's any concrete policy to announce. If not, we'll just move on.
We can deliver economic stability, cut the NHS waiting times, secure our borders with a new border security command.
I mean, finally, at least he's finally saying something that's to do with policy, yes. Please get a better border force, that would be good, thank you. Do I believe you'll do it? Well, given that the civil service are saying, well, what they should do instead is just make coming over here on a dinghy legal, I don't trust that that's what they're actually going to be there for, to turn them round. They're probably going to be there to effectively rubber stamp them as legally coming into the country. I have no doubt that that is what they are going to end up doing. Because it's been the plan with kind of aware new elites for a while. Matt Goodwin certainly used to say this, though he's definitely changed his tune and actually unironically come round to our side. But as long as you signal that you are going to do things that the plebs want, such as control borders, you don't actually have to do anything substantial there. You just have to basically give them lip service and put a facade that something is being done about it. You know, if you just make all illegal crossings legal, then you can't have stats on illegal crossings, because you won't have any because they're all legal. I mean, let's just listen to the next bit. What is this new security force going to do?
Harness great British energy to cut your bills for good.
I mean, I suppose I'll give him some leeway. He is in the middle of a speech and he is trying to throw some red meat out there, so obviously he just moves on from it. But given that I have absolutely no actual idea what the details of this new border security force are going to do, I have to assume that what the civil service have been saying for years, because Labour is full of ex-civil servants, is that, again, they just want to make it all legal so that you can't have stats saying, look, the dinghy crossings are coming over illegally, that's bad. You can now say, look, it's legal, nothing to worry about, no illegal crossings, we're all good. Unironically, that is what they'll do. I promise it now. But anyway, again, when it comes to energy, their whole plan is to just carry on with the net zero green energy nonsense. Again, private sector is more and more refusing to actually put up more renewable energy because they are finding it hard to make a profit off it, because we have an energy price cap, and because we have an energy price cap, they're realising, oh, we can't make a profit off these, hugely small prices. So no thank you, we are not going to bid for this energy project. And I can't see Labour changing that at all. I can only see them putting more public money into it all because it's the only way they'll be able to get what they want. And that means, yay, more taxes. Great. Can't wait to be poor again.
Tackle antisocial behaviour and get the teachers we need in your children's classroom. But most importantly of all, we do all this with a new spirit of service. Country first, party second.
That's pretty much all the policy has, just vague, these are things you want and I promise that I will give them to you. Fine, it's an initial speech on the first day of a campaign, let's wait for the manifesto. Overall, until I see details of these policies, as I say, I just don't trust them on anything. I don't trust the Tories that much more, to be fair. However, at least I don't think I'm at risk of being arrested for having this YouTube channel under the Tories. However, for all I know, that'll change in 4 years' time, so rock in a hard place. Anyway, a political titan that everyone was waiting to hear from was Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage last night on GB News said that he will have an overnight think about what he's going to do. However, he sent out this press release. I have thought long and hard as to whether I should stand in the upcoming general election. As Honorary President of Reform UK, I am fully supportive of Richard Tice's leadership and urge voters to put their trust in him and Lee Anderson. And honestly, right, this is my idea. So, at the moment I'm thinking spoil ballot, vote Tory, vote Reform. Vote Reform is still an option, but they've been pretty bad for the last few months. Depending how they improve with Nigel Farage helping on the campaign trail, I could vote for them. It depends on who the candidate is, but obviously a lot of people don't trust them because as soon as Hope Not Hate said, hey, you've got some people we don't like in your ranks, then obviously they folded instantly. How are they going to last in government? I don't know. But is it good as a protest vote against the Tories still? Yeah, probably. I mean, if you don't want 0 seats, why not vote Reform? They are definitely better than Labour. I will do my bit to help in the campaign, but it is not the right time for me to go any further than that. Important though the general election is, the contest in the US on November 5 has huge global significance. A strong America as a close ally is vital for our peace and security. I intend to help with grassroots campaigning in the USA in any way that I can. Fair enough. The choice between Labour and Conservative is unsurprising, and only Reform have the radical agenda that is needed to end the decline in this country. Signed, Nigel Farage. So, am I disappointed in Farage? I don't really know. I don't know how I feel, whether I'm disappointed or not in this, because if I was Farage, I would not go back to frontline politics if I were you. Partially because he has a cushy job at GB News, and to be honest, his show there is pretty good. It's one of my favourites on GB News. I don't think his return to frontline politics will necessarily be a success. In fact, I think it's quite likely it will have a positive impact, but not enough to actually get Reform UK MPs in Parliament. And as he says, I think he would be a lot better off in America helping with the Trump campaign. Because I think there's more significance to helping Trump get into office in America to affect British politics than there would be for trying to get Reform UK into Parliament when it's not actually that likely. Because, as everyone says, we are effectively America's lapdog. It's annoying, but it's true. We can't really make a decision on our own. And an awful lot of our culture and even politics is influenced by American culture and politics. You know, you can blame that on TV or America's cultural exports. It doesn't really matter. Point being is that if Trump is president, I think that will have a hell of a lot more influence on how the UK is run than if we get Reform UK in, or Tories in, or even Labour in. So as I say, fair enough to Nigel Farage, but as Isabel Oakeshott lets us know, Farage will actually hit the campaign trail for Reform in the upcoming election. And apparently Sunak got wind of that imminent return, including the planned campaign schedule, and so was panicked into calling the election. And that's apparently a rumour as to why there is bizarre timing for this suicidal election. Do I buy that? Not really. However, at least we will have memes of Farage on the campaign trail, so I suppose I can be happy with that. Right, next up, let's get a small feeling of how the Tory MPs in swing seats are feeling. Here is probably one of the most schizophrenic politicians I've ever seen, Steve Baker being interviewed by Victoria Derbyshire for the BBC.
You might lose your job. You've got a majority of what, 4,500?
It's about 4,500 now,
so
yes.
you might not be an MP come July the 5th.
That is absolutely true, yes.
It's just the implication of, yep, I'm probably going to lose my job. It looks like he is a completely demoralised man behind an almost absurdist facade. I know that things don't look good. I'm still going to put the effort in, though, but I know it's basically all going to be for naught. Let's see what he has to say further.
But, you know, I've never taken the voters of Wickham for granted. It's true that without my best ward of Hazelmere, I am widely expected to lose. But, you know, I'm optimistic that the people of Wickham prefer Conservative government to Labour government. I'm very clear that a Labour government's the worst kind of government for working people in particular. And so I'm going to be putting myself forward, and of course hoping to win.
Credit where credit's due to Steve Baker. He is pretty good at interviews. But, yeah, reading the subtext here, as I say, absurdist facade. Behind those eyes is a man who is expecting to have to look for another job at some point. So genuinely best of luck to him. As schizophrenic as he is with his politics, he is still one of the better MPs for Labour, which isn't saying a lot, but I hope he gets back in. But I'm not holding out hope.
But aren't you a bit hacked off, and presumably some of your colleagues with smaller majorities, because you might be out of a job sooner?
My first concern has never been my job. You know, if I'd been looking after...
You're only human, come on.
Yeah, but look, the reality is, if you say that, the truth is, for me, if I'd been looking after my best interests, I would have stayed working in the city for a lot more money than I get as an MP.
And with that, if you want to see more of that interview, feel free, link in the description. But this is why I will always have a soft spot for Steve Baker. Even with his... I mean, people might be wondering why I'm saying he's schizophrenic. It's because... on some days he'll say woke is literally the worst thing in the world and needs to just be got out of government, and then on other days he'll be saying Black Lives Matter and showing off what is happening in his constituency with things like education for BAME people and things like that. You know, woke things. That's why I call him schizophrenic. But at the end of the day, as he says, he didn't do this for money. He did this because he genuinely wanted to get into politics and change things, and he's tried for 14 years and, you know, what's he got to show for it? Well, divided opinions, and he's probably realised he can't really get anywhere in Parliament anyway. You know, I think a lot of Tory MPs are realising what Liz Truss realised when she got to the very top. She can't actually do anything, because you've got all of these extra parliamentary, independent, quote-unquote, piece of government fractured about the whole place that are just bloated with bureaucracy. Bank of England, the Whitehall, Civil Service... Ofcom, DEFRA, all these different departments that are largely independent and make their own decisions, and mainly are just there to follow the law that, again, can only really go through as long as it's unchallenged by all these independent quangos and departments. So I'm not surprised that he's got a facade of almost an absurdist guy, because he knows if he doesn't get voted in, and likely won't, as he says, he can just go back to the City of London and work. He will be fine, and I wouldn't be surprised if many Tory MPs feel like that, because a lot of them have gone into politics after working in some other department. Liz Truss was a chartered accountant, Suella Braverman was a lawyer, Rishi Sunak, I can't remember exactly what his job was, but he also worked in the city. He also used to work for think tanks, so might go back to that as well. So for many reasons, this is going to be one of the most interesting election periods probably that we'll ever witness, and I'm very glad I am in this part of my YouTube career to cover it. Right, finally, the Tory black pills I mentioned 40 minutes ago. Wow, it wasn't an hour. This is actually shorter than I thought it would be. The Spectator had a leading article today called "A Summer Election is Suicide for the Tories," and the reason I'm bringing this up is because, well, a lot of what I've said is repeated in this article, so I'm not going through it for that reason, but they have some interesting graphs that kind of show why Rishi Sunak's plan is just going to be a disaster. As mentioned before, one of the promises was to bring down the waiting list times, and with the Westminster only affecting NHS England because it's a devolved issue, all they can promise is NHS England waiting times will drop. This is a graph of actual NHS waiting times compared with an IFS model assuming 30% of patients who missed care due to lockdown return to the NHS, i.e. a model for predicted NHS waiting times. Or sorry, the number on the waiting list, which is a good proxy for waiting times. So as you can see, the line just goes up after COVID. Obviously it does. That was a big problem with COVID. And the prediction is clearly already lower than what NHS waiting times are, and NHS waiting times at the moment are practically plateauing. It's just flat. Whether that's going to come down or not, I mean, I don't see how it could go up any further. It's hard to say, but the point I'm trying to make is, yes, this is what Rishi Sunak is gambling everything on. A few theories, a few models that everyone keeps pointing out are always wrong. Whether it's for the climate, economy, NHS waiting times here, doesn't matter. They always seem to be wrong, and even the error bars aren't even that useful. But if this is what you're running an election campaign on, look at this graph. You're not going to do very well. And this isn't the only one. This is yet another graph going into a future predicted model that shows you from 2010 to 2023. Yes, disposable household income in real terms kind of went up and dropped a bit in the last few years. Again, thanks to the cost of living crisis, which was a result of locking down the entire country and having absolutely no productivity for half a year to a year. You then look at the predicted outcome and it kind of just says, yeah, it's probably going to follow the trend from 2012 to 2017. And honestly, probably not that bad a forecast, to be quite honest with you. But again, you are asking people to say, right, ignore those last 2 years of plateauing and falling down. We're looking at the bit that goes up. Please, we're asking you, we're begging you, please vote for us for our theory. And people just aren't going to buy it. It's not how politics works, I'm afraid. If you have been in charge for 14 years and people see a disaster, or many disasters, within your ruling for the last 14 years, of course they're not going to vote for you. It's ruined it for Brown. And yet the Tories have decided to learn absolutely nothing from it. They're not even doing the politically savvy things that Brown did, like laying traps down for Labour, aside maybe from Rwanda. But even bringing up Rwanda's really embarrassing. Here is an interview from today of Rishi Sunak on the problem of the Rwanda policy.
Can you tell us today, on day one of the election campaign, when will the first flight go?
Yeah, I addressed this in detail just a little while ago at a press conference. The first flights will go in July, and we've already put the preparations in place for that.
Possibly the worst announcement you could probably give on that. You're banking it on stopping the boats. Okay, the Rwanda policy is your flagship policy, and a lot of Europe agree with it. Yeah, even I agree it's a good idea. Okay? But literally, no flights are going to be sent out until July. Presumably that doesn't mean July 1st, 2nd, 3rd or 4th. Presumably that means more mid-July. So even by the time of this election, no one will see any benefit to anything you're promising. Some people might see a slight rise in their disposable income, maybe. But for the majority of people, they are going to see no tangible benefit to all the plans. It is literally all just trust me bro politics. And my god, if you thought that the Tories are doing bad in the polls now, I don't think it's going to improve that much with this election campaign. It's going to get so much worse before it gets better. This is a fantastic sign-off to the clown decade Tory party. Again, I don't know if I'm spoiling or voting for them or voting reform yet. They've all got 6 weeks to convince me. There is no way I trust Labour, though. Anyone who is deciding to vote for them is frankly insane. If they are saying they are on the right wing, we have got nothing but disaster to look forward to. So I guess enjoy it while we can. Right, well, I suppose it's also worth announcing at this point that I will be doing a election stream on the night of the election, seeing the results come in and possibly dying of alcohol poisoning. As I drown my sorrows with, I'm sure I'll have plenty of guests on as well to give running political commentary. And of course, we will be showing off memes and the like as well. If you would like to send memes as we are doing the stream, of course it will be on this channel, therefore you need to be in my Discord. The link is down below. It would be good to have an active Discord while this is going on as well, because the more information I can get from everything to do with this campaign from every party, the better. Of course, for the more short term, Laughing at the Guardian returns Saturday. I have got all the usual guests on, John, Tharium and Tory Rebuttal, because I think we all want to have our piece on what to say about the Guardian's reaction to all this. Tosh will be returning as normal next week. No doubt we will be mostly talking about the election campaign as well. Regional Variations will be next Wednesday to distract us from all this as well. And then we will actually be reading How Our Parliament Works next Friday on Publish and Be Damned on the Wellington Project. So please subscribe to this channel, subscribe to the Wellington Project, subscribe to Tail Feature, and please join all the Discords as well. Right, with that, that is everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.